Here I go. So it looks like I may have some shoes. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. My name is Margaret Hill. I am one of the co-founders of MuslimARC, and in service as programming director. I'm really excited today to have a panel of our esteemed guests, Halima Barusha, Jay Austin Yoshino, and Dr. Dylan Rodriguez. And so we're going to kind of go live and across our platforms. And as we kind of get started, I wanted you all to introduce yourselves, share more about your work, the things that you're working on, and a little bit about your field, and then we'll kind of go into a lively discussion around Black Asian solidarity. So maybe we could start in alphabetical order. It's like, let's start with D, with first names by alphabetical order.
Pleasure. First, let me just express my gratitude and just humble appreciation for being invited into conversation by MuslimARC and by Marjorie, and to be in conversation with Jay Austin and Halima. My name's Dylan Rodriguez. I have the employed position. I'm employed at the University of California, the Riverside campus. I have the position of distinguished professor, which is a fancy title. Just means I've been there a long time. And I'm in the Department of Black Study and the Department of Media and Cultural Studies. For a long time, I was in the Department of Ethnic Studies. But more importantly, I'm a parent, I'm a comrade, I'm a collaborator and co-conspirator in a number of different organizations and collectives and experiments and projects that have a liberationist and anti-colonial and Black radical and generally counter and anti-civilizational politics and imagination. I aspire to be in community with any people and collectives that work within anti-colonial and liberation traditions. And I think the concept that we're trying to address today around solidarity, especially Black Asian solidarity, is especially complex and urgent and requires a lot of creativity and militant seriousness on our part. So I'm deeply committed to having that conversation with people here. So I'm working on a bunch of stuff. I have um, a book that's coming out early next year called Counterinsurgency Machine, which is based on 20 years of obsession around how the political logic of counterinsurgency has affected social movements, especially progressive and social justice oriented movements, since really since the 1980s and 1990s. So I'm sure some of the ideas that kind of construct the framework for that book will probably come up in our conversation today. And the book's available for pre-order. I don't have the link on me because I'm not good at selling things, but it's out there. AK Press, you can find it. But anyway, yeah, pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation, y'all.
Thank you so much. And yeah, we want to have our next, like within alphabetical order, like Halima, can you share with us about, tell us something about yourself, some of the projects that you're working on, and, and help get us started, move this conversation forward.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with all the fellow panelists and very excited to get into the conversation. I've been involved as a community member here in the Bay Area, working with the organization called Alliance of South Asians Taking Action, or ASATA. This is an organization that has been around for decades and has been working on cross solidarity and racial building, racial solidarity and movement building work. And particularly, we've been focused more recently around immigration, labor rights, and really engaging in some of the local campaigns that have been happening here, like such as the Oakland Arms embargo campaign. And so it's been great to be involved in this. This is an entirely volunteer-led organization and does amazing work in the Bay Area. So for anyone who's tuning in locally, definitely check us out. And it's a great organization to be involved in a very good political home and space. I've also, through being involved with ASATA, first got involved through their Bay Area Solidarity Summer Program, which is actually just coming up. And it is a program for young South Asians who are interested in learning more about their history, their identity, and also how they can get get involved in racial solidarity work and what it looks like to organize effectively. And that was, I think, back in 2018 when I joined that summer program and got to learn a lot more about what does it mean to be South Asian in America, right, within this context, and understanding more about the different dynamics that are at play, right, and how we dismantle some of those, like the model minority myth, for example. And through that, met a group of people, and we were all kind of working together on this project called South Asians for Black Lives, which is really focused on how do we work on our own internalized anti-Blackness within the South Asian community, and how do we work on building tangible solidarity with South Asian and Black communities. And so, yeah, I've been involved on and off with the Satha group. It's all volunteer led, which I think is amazing. And outside of that, I do art. I have a small art shop called Generative, and I use art as a medium for practicing self-care, but also really a space for imagination and creativity. So I think often we get so wrapped up in the grind that it can be hard to really make that space to think about what is the future that we're trying to build and what do we want. So yeah, excited to get into the conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited about what you have to say, and I love your art. I love the art shop. We need more of that. And so in our last but not least, our final panelists. So John, J. Austin Yoshino, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm J. Austin Yoshino, and I want to thank you also, Marguerite, for thinking of me for this panel. I am Black Asian Solidarity is got a specific and very large place in my heart because I am part Black and part Japanese. So, you know, I've been able to witness and watch a lot of this from both sides of the fence. I am during the day, I'm an interactive designer, and well, usually right now I'm a caregiver, but in my off time, I'm a science fiction writer, and I have a magazine called Fresh Pulp Magazine. It's a zine online that does science fiction and science communication. So the whole endeavor is, and it's, by the way, it's a leftist science fiction sci-con magazine. So everything that I do or we do at Fresh Pulp is designed to educate people around the sciences, because a lot of the vitriol that we're seeing today actually is a result directly of a lack of education around sciences and that sort of thing. So yeah, so that's it. And you know, I have my side projects. I do a lot of mutual aid. No specific organization. I just go where people ask me. And yeah.
Thank you so much. So we're already getting some comments here. We have somebody that says it's all lies. So that's pretty wild. It's like even before we spoke, you know, we already have some pushback on the truths that you are all dropping. And so let's just kind of get right into it. Maybe we can, like, if each person, like, let's share what are your thoughts on the importance of Black Asian solidarity, and then get into you know, how can we have more of it? So who would like to just kind of dive in and you know, its significance, its importance right now in this present moment?
I would love. Oh, please go ahead. Please. No.
Very briefly, I mean, because a lot of my TikTok content, for example, has been about Black Asian solidarity lately. And I think something that's very urgent right now is there is an entire history of organizing in solidarity between various communities, in particular Black and Asian communities, that's been paved over entirely. And I think that in order to get people on board with this concept, we need to show them that the ancestors, that the people who came before them, were down with the cause. And a really good example of that would be like Black solidarity with South Asia, right? Like literally 30 years after the end of slavery, there was a journalist named Bruce Gritt who, in his newspaper, published an article that had withering criticism for the British and their consistent like brutality against, you know, South Asia. So, and that was, like I said, 30 years after the end of slavery. So, I think that we need to sort of focus a lot on that. And I think when people see that, they will get on board with this.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
I think
Dylan, Halima, go
Oh,
ahead.
I was just gonna say very briefly that that is something that I agree needs to be daylighted. And as someone who is South Asian, growing up in the Bay Area, I always felt like almost an outsider in my community because I would bring up topics like police violence and then be told like you're talking about stuff that's not our business, or why do you have to bring this into the conversation, or what's the relevance? And I never really saw myself in movements, or like my people, I guess, in movements, because that history was not daylighted. And it wasn't until I went to the summer program with Asata that I learned more and said, wait a minute, there is a place for South Asians in movement work. Our ancestors have fought and done activism in a number of different places. There's also this history of solidarity work between Black and Asian communities. And all of that was kind of just brushed under the rug or hidden to kind of make it seem like this is not a thing that South Asians do. Why are you even bringing that up? So I really appreciate that you brought that up.
And I think the way I'd like to speak to this, I thought about three related things when I first when you invited me. The first historical figure I thought about was, of course, Yuri Kochiyama. Yuri Kochiyama is a precious and important figure for a lot of radical Asian people, Asian American or not, right? For radical Asian people, Yuri Kochiyama is a kind of a touchstone of internationalist, global, and Black liberationist radicalism. And I think what's important to think about with a person like Yuri Kochiyama is that she was a deeply committed Black liberationist. She was a student and comrade of Malcolm X. She, for probably well over half a century, was a stalwart supporter of anti-colonial political prisoners, Black liberation political prisoners, from the Puerto Rican independentistas to Weather Underground, to Black Liberation Army folks, unrecognized political prisoners in the United States. I mean, so Yuri Kochiyama is, I think, a touchstone in ways that extend beyond the narratives of hero worship that we often get. I think she is literally a role model for thinking about how people of Asian descent can and should be participating in collective radicalisms that have, a kind of revolutionary liberationist militancy fueling them. And I'll also say that Yuri Kochiyama she never identified herself, to my knowledge, as an Asian American. That's a kind of identity that developed out of particular kinds of conditions. So we need to understand that piece as well. The second thing that came to mind about Black Asian solidarity is to think about Black Asian solidarity in the context of something like Palestinian liberation, right? Palestinian liberation, both in the context of long Nakba and in the context of the recent and ongoing accelerated exterminationist militarization by Israel with the assistance of the United States, right? So what does Black Asian solidarity look like in the context of this particular acute evisceration of an entire people and their geography? And there's, of course, some profound gaps around that form of solidarity. So what does it mean to think solidarity in the context of another kind of immediate and urgent solidarity? And then, of course, alongside all this is, what does it mean to think Black Asian solidarity in the immediate, local, domestic context of anti-Black domestic war in the United States, which is the ongoing, permanent condition of the United States. So what does it mean to build Black Asian and Black Asian American solidarity, for that matter, as a form of liberationist experimentation and even counterwar against the one directional anti-Blackness of the U.S. nation building project? That's what this solidarity possibility means to me, and that's the only way it's going to matter.
Thank you. So let's get into, I mean, you were all touched upon like history, what's happening now. So maybe we could kind of do a deeper dive as far as like, what are some of the challenges of the solidarity work? What are some of the stumbling blocks that we need to overcome to strengthen it? Maybe I'll have each of you speak to some of the challenges.
I think Halima sort of touched upon this, which was, absolutely correct, which is, I think that we have to, I think there's a couple of things that have to happen right now. And one of those things is that, that in terms of Asian Black solidarity, folks need to go back to their communities and dismantle the anti-Blackness. And for that matter, the colorism and that sort of thing. And which is not to say that Black folks similarly don't have those issues to struggle with. Like we do, like in more recent times, particularly the divisions that have been created in the Black community about Palestine, this is more important than ever, right? Because the Black community has been entirely captured by the left wing of the right wing party, right? Not entirely, but like 80%. And so I think that we need to go and have those tough conversations about solidarity and transactional solidarity, and we need to start explaining to people how liberating others is liberating ourselves. And I think the fear amongst Black folks is that we will do this labor again and still end up at kind of like the bottom at the bottom rung of the ladder, which I think is a valid fear. But I think that we have to sort of work on that. I think the final thing is that I'm gonna say is we absolutely have to decenter whiteness, and we have to decenter whiteness in particular in our movements, right? Because there is this tendency that I've seen a lot of movements, and more recently, I've had a couple of movements that I supported that had been completely dismantled by white leadership. But mainly, I think that the tendency to put white folks in charge, essentially outsourcing your own liberation, I think that has to end.
Thank you. That's pretty powerful. Been trying to do that level of work by looking at our kind of historical connections that predate the ascendancy of Europe as a power, looking at the historical connections. So during May, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, we're starting to release resources of connecting the Indian Ocean and Silk Route. So, I'm really excited to kind of historically decenter Europe, and then in our movement spaces. So there's a lot of promise to that. Halima, maybe can you speak on some of the stumbling blocks and some of your strategies for overcoming some of the stumbling blocks in Black Asian solidarity?
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges is, when we talk about engaging South Asian communities in this work, sometimes there's this like, what about me and my challenges, or, the trauma that my ancestors have experienced. And I think that speaks to the fact that like a lot of our own communities have not done that healing work. We've partition, for example, is an event that took place not that long ago, right? We still have many people in our family who have memories of what that very violent experience was like, and that type of violence changes your DNA, it gets passed on. So there's obviously a lot there that needs to be unpacked, but is not really talked about. And I think that prevents people from even being able to see beyond themselves. And then I also think there's this other piece of, particularly within like Indian communities, right? There is the self, the racism towards self and like our own people, right? You think about the caste system and you think about colorism, all of that is like within this diaspora, and then you have this external racism and anti-Blackness that shows up. And so there's almost like two parts of what needs to be addressed, and they are interconnected, right? In the sense that the theory and the concept is being applied to both people of your own community and people outside of your community. But they are still two very different things with very different histories that need to be addressed. And I found that sometimes when engaging with South Asian communities about what we need to do about anti-Blackness, it kind of comes back to like us in a way. And I can give you an example. When we were managing South Asians for Black Lives, it ended up as a very small project that kind of blew up very unexpectedly. It was really meant for us to educate ourselves. And then next thing you know, there's this huge following and people are coming to us and asking us for information, and we're learning ourselves along the way. But one thing I remember after George Floyd was, there was a lot of conversation and work around what do we do to address police violence, right? And systemic racism and oppression. And immediately there was a shift to, oh, this is the perfect time for us to address Fair and Lovely. And it was like a group of South Asians who started a campaign to say, like, we need to put an end to Fair and Lovely because skin lightening creams are problematic and it's feeding into anti-Blackness and colorism. And it's like, cool, like, sure, that does need to be addressed. But in this exact moment that we are in right now, it's not about South Asians and our internal colorism. This is about police violence and people literally being killed. And we need to focus on that and organize around that. And so I just think it's really challenging sometimes to actually understand, like, when we say racial solidarity, when we say we're addressing anti-Blackness, it's not talking necessarily about the internal problems and the issues that we have within our own community, the discrimination amongst each other and ourselves. That should be addressed, yes, but that is like a whole separate conversation and piece from when we're talking about addressing anti-Blackness and building like very tangible solidarity with Black communities. And so I think there's kind of that piece that needs to be unpacked. And, so many communities still haven't even talked about the internal discrimination that we see. So I think that becomes a huge challenge sometimes in actually being able to move forward.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think you're really speaking to like the challenges of doing that work of uprooting our own internalized racism. Because even in our curriculum at MuslimARC, it's like a lot of our focus has been, you have to go through the process of uprooting your own internalized racism before you can think that you're saving other people and saving Black people. So there's sometimes this like saviorism that can happen. And so, but I want to kind of shift, and we're going to bring back Dylan Rodriguez back to our stage. But I like our questions as far as like, what are some of the obstacles to solidarity? And for a number of years, like in the spaces that we've had at MuslimARC, there have been some academics who've had issues with Afro-pessimism, like they've seen that as a big problem. Sometimes there's other ideological frameworks that may cause some problems with solidarity. I think, there are some aspects of understanding anti-Blackness as global, but also what are some liberatory frameworks that can bring us into solidarity with each other?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things I want to think about as far as how solidarity gets undermined by forms of mobilization and social justice organizing that understand themselves to be anti-racist and maybe even understand themselves to be in some kind of coalitional and sometimes solidarity relation to Black liberationist work or work that is trying to stoke radical confrontations with anti-Blackness. So the most important recent example that I'm hoping people here are familiar with is the Stop Asian Hate campaign that really flourished a couple years ago. It was really fueled initially as a social media campaign, but I have to say that the Stop Asian Hate, the dominant stream of the Stop Asian Hate movement, which uncoincidentally very quickly obtained tens of millions of dollars of support from the government, from the police, from the FBI, from large philanthropic foundations to advance its appeals around expanding hate crime policing. This movement pivoted on appeals to the government, to the police, and to the state to expand the anti-Black apparatuses of policing, criminalization, prosecution, and incarceration, as if those things would ever remotely slow down gendered and racist anti-Asian violence. So we have to take these formations of anti-hate politics really seriously and understand that to the extent that movements invest faith or invest in kind of claims to the government and to the state, not to mention the police, as being the foundations of solutions to systemic as well as interpersonal violence against their people, the communities and their populations, then what you're actually doing is you're throwing in solidarity with anti-Blackness right? You're actually throwing in solidarity with the anti-Blackness of an existing institution and apparatus. So what this plays into as well, I think, and this is something that I think various forms of Black radicalism and Asian American radicalism get right. Whether it's Afro-pessimism, but there's so many different rich traditions in Black radicalism. I think it does a disservice to the archives of Black radicalism to fixate on one particular stream, right? But Black radicalism and various forms of Asian radicalism, what they share in common are radical criticisms of liberal identity politics. Like that's what they share in common, right? They share in common by liberal identity politics. I'm talking about forms of identity that compartmentalize oppression to what eventually become issue-based campaigns in which communities and movements appeal to the government and the state for solutions, right? And not only that, they then see themselves as in competition with each other over a kind of zero-sum game that usually has to do with appeals to the government, the state, and the kind of entities that dominate global racial capitalism, right? So like there's a zero-sum game of competition there. I mean, I think one of the best analyses, one of the best ways to understand that analysis is shout out Erica Keynes, also known as Hood Communist, right? Who formulated this term identity reductionism that I come to all the time, right? Identity reductionism is one of the primary ways that the solidarity that we are talking about gets undermined and destroyed. And identity reductionism is the notion that a person's identity renders their political positions and their political analysis beyond criticism and correction. Right. And we see this happening in I would argue, we see this happening in all of our movements, all of our organizations, all of our families for that matter, right? The notion that because I inhabit a certain identity position, then how dare you tell me I'm wrong? Right. That's identity reductionism. So I understand the frustration with certain forms of thought, including, I think, misreadings of the Afro-pessimist framework that become sophisticated assertions of identity reductionism. So I think we need to identify these things collectively. We need to deal with them in their complexity. We need to study them together, and we need to find strategies to confront them and push them back, like on principle. We need to be principled about how we do this. Otherwise, there's no solidarity.
Yeah, and I think also, a question that I come to is as we think about the diversity, racial diversity in this country, and we're getting to a place where more and more people are going to be people of color. We really have to move past the identity politics, right? Just because I am a person of color doesn't mean that I have now some level of righteousness or rightness or entitlement in a movement space, right? Or so I think there is a lot there for us to think about, and like really thinking more about like what is the value and like what are you bringing in terms of action. And I think similarly, when we think about these stop API hate type of movements that have come out, and there's been a couple of waves, if like in the past few years, a lot of it gets dominated by conversations about policing and surveillance. And you will see in the news, right, there will be someone from the Asian community saying, hey, we're so happy that there's more cop cars, in Chinatown. This is going to be great to make everyone feel safe. And it begs the question of like, who is going to be safe with this, right? And also overlooks the fact that policing and a lot of these systems impact all of our communities in different ways. But the whole system is intertwined. And so there is a whole piece there around how are we moving beyond the identity politics aspect of it? And that gets so easily leveraged, right, in mainstream media and mainstream news, to kind of have that token person from a community saying, well, they endorsed it, so this is a good idea, or we're going to go ahead with this. And I think especially as there's more and more surveillance, right? For example, in Oakland, we are fighting against the flock system. And these are surveillance cameras that are popping up all over the country, and communities are pushing back. But when we think about the growth, and I was just today years old when I found out that they also come equipped with microphones. I thought they were just cameras, but apparently they can also pick up sound. And so these systems are becoming stronger and stronger and more sophisticated, but I feel like our organizing and our movement work has not really caught up to that level in terms of the skills that we need to build, the education that we need to do, the infrastructure, and infrastructure outside of mainstream systems, right? Like I know a lot of people are probably using Signal, or we've migrated to some of these other platforms, but even then, there's always loopholes on how surveillance continues. And so we really have to create our own infrastructure on so many levels. And I always have this panic moment of like, we haven't done that work, right? Like if something bad happens today, like be it a natural disaster or, some type of uprising, I don't even know my neighbors, right, to have a plan on what we're going to be doing about whatever comes our way. And so I think there's so much work that needs to happen. And it's also hard to do that work when you're in this hamster wheel of racial capitalism and you are on that grind, having to survive and think about that. But, the system is working exactly as it was designed to, right? And I think we need more points of disruption, and disruption that's tangible, right? Something that you can do as an everyday working person.
John, can you speak to that? I mean, there's
Yeah,
some things
like
I know
I'm
about your work as far as like preparedness and responding to crises. And so maybe you could have some thoughts on like, what do we do? How do we get prepared for the disaster? We're in the middle of a disaster. So how could we do better?
There's a couple of things that I want to address because I want to make a distinction between what Dylan and Halima are saying with regards to moving past identity politics, versus what, because that term has been weaponized in various ways. I've seen, at least on the ground. And one of the things that I've noticed, for example, and I'll give you an example, is that I'm very picky now, cagey about who I work with in terms of mutual aid. And in part because very often there are people in those organizations that whose values don't align with mine. They're still racist. They are unwilling to part with their privilege or dismantle it. They're misogynist. Like there's a whole host of reasons. But one of the things that I see the most, and this is not exclusive to, but primarily amongst white men, is that their movement building isn't about liberation. It's about their disaffection, right? It's about their disaffection. It's not about anyone else's alienation or marginalization from the system. I firmly believe that in many cases, if they were getting the same level of authority or clout on the right, they would be there. And so I think that a lot of these movements are, contain these people. And I'm not embarrassed to say that I have been asked to leave on a couple of occasions because I pointed this out. But I did say that it's not exclusive to whites. And the reason why I say that is because one of the things that I think a lot of Black folks struggle with today is internationalism, right? That's a big struggle right now. Not really, and a lot of these folks don't really see the history of internationalism that existed amongst Black folks in previous generations. And people say, well, why should I do this? Why should I risk this? Or why should I do anything? We're one generation away from poverty, which is, okay. But there is a privilege that Black folks have that they don't necessarily either acknowledge or realize, which is proximity to the imperial core, right? That's where you live. And because of that, you have an inordinate capacity to be disruptive, right? To make your voices heard. And you also have a very big megaphone through which your message can be blasted out amongst other nations. So I think that we need to sort of be apprised of that. We need to sort of, realize it, internalize it, and use it. Now, to address the preparedness thing, I spent about, I think, 5 or 6 years now working on a food assurance project and a carbon neutral system of growing food and generating energy. So I built biogas digesters, I built water filters, I've built algae ponds. I have used the gas from biogas digesters to power a small turbine. And also I have created a macronutrient chart for communities in the event of general strikes, right? Because one of the first things you're going to come up against in a general strike is the lack of food, right? The lack of resources. And so I created a system where people can grow like 40 pounds of potatoes in a garbage can, and they can grow, 50 pounds of mushrooms in their basement, that sort of thing. But also in terms of other forms of preparedness, I did used to work in crisis management when I was much younger, and so I do teach people, I do train people in self-defense, in various forms of self-defense. So not just with your hands.
So I think we know where we're gonna go when the apocalypse hits.
Yo, can I speak? Can I just I just want to speak to how important it is that you're doing that,
Yeah.
and how that establishes a model, I think, for everybody who is here to find ways to source and proliferate your already existing skill sets toward autonomy, toward autonomous infrastructure building. I mean, everything you just outlined is about building an autonomous
Yes.
infrastructure of care, of energy and food production, of social reproduction, that is not about begging the state to be better or begging a corporation or an energy grid to work better. As Halima said, that stuff is working exactly as it's supposed to, right? Its accelerated collapse is actually how it's supposed to work. That's why all the oligarchs are talking about going to damn Mars, right? Like, they know what they are doing when they extract and collapse environment, ecology, and climate. So I will say that this notion of preparedness is something that a lot of our folks need to catch up with real quick, because to this point, the preppers have largely been right-wing folks, like reactionaries, fascists and proto-fascists, white supremacists, kind of reactionary right-wing libertarians, not the cool kind of libertarians, the right-wing libertarians. You know what I'm saying? So we actually need to be more anarchist. We have to
Yes.
embrace an anarchist politics, an anarchist
Yes.
way of understanding the world around us. And folks get scared of that, because when you
Yes.
say anarchist, they think of
Yes.
lifestyle, white hippie anarchists. We are not talking about that form of anarchism that comes from these traditions of liberal white supremacy. We are talking forms of anarchism that are not known as anarchism in indigenous and aboriginal and black and Afro-descended communities, right? They don't necessarily use that term. But if we're thinking politically about the kind of how we confound and create real radical autonomy from the liberal frameworks that are actually genocidal, right? They actually kill, they actually exterminate. Then I think the kinds of things that you are outlining are the kinds of things that all of us have to collectively embrace. So yeah, so like I train people in various ways, including firearms training. I say that
Yep.
unabashedly. Like, come see
Right.
me. I'm down to take you to the range. Like, I
Yes.
enjoy it. Like, and I'm not scared of it, and I want you to not be scared of it. But it also means that these weird specialized skill sets that all of us have as science fiction writers, as community-based and organizers that have like been through all forms of tension and antagonism. Somebody like me who's studies and writes and teaches for a living, these are skill sets that can and should be proliferated toward autonomy and shared outside our sites of work and employment. Sorry for taking up so much space.
Yep.
No.
No,
Can I just
I
respond
think
to that really
that's
quickly? I'm sorry.
yeah.
Can I just say one thing really quickly? I just
Yeah,
want to
no,
say
go for
really
it, go for it.
quickly that a lot of folks are not ready for that conversation. Like I don't mean that like figuratively. Like, they really are not ready for that conversation. Like, I try to ease people into conversations around that, and they immediately have a really negative reaction to it. Like, you're just too militant. And I'm like, no, I think that's common sense at this point. So
Yeah, especially
Lima, weigh
with where
in.
things are going. I think I just wanted to tag on to a little bit of what Dylan was saying. There's also this piece of like who is preparing and who is uh getting those skills and doing those trainings, and a lot of times it is not communities of color. Recently I had a friend who got trained in how to use a ham radio, and when they went to the class and did the certification, it was all white people. And so it's like, great, when there's a power blackout, it's just going to be them talking on the radio, and then anyone else is like not going to be able to get on or figure that out. And so I do think it's important. And then that's also where the solidarity piece comes in, because it's very easy, I think, in these times of crisis for everyone to go into like insular, me, myself, and I, my people, my community. But where's that collective we, right? And I think that's where solidarity work becomes really important. And yeah, I just think too often sometimes within, again, Indian communities, right? I am Indian, so I feel like, I can say these things, but I just feel like there is this level of me that I see a lot within Indian communities. And again, you think of caste and all these other pieces. There's so much of like where we don't even within ourselves are not going to be helping each other out in times of crisis. And so I do think there's a piece there to address. And then when you look at like demographics, right, like 25% almost of the world population is South Asian. That's a quarter of the whole world population, right? And then when you think about like how South Asians are doing in this country, and of course, South Asian super broad, right? You break it up, Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lanka. I mean, there's so many subgroups within that. But when you look at like statistics in this country, like Indians, for example, some of them are making more money than white people. There's a proximity to whiteness. There's a proximity in terms of class. And when those are the people that are moving up and do not look back, and if anything, become part of that system and will also go into the same, we're part of this white supremacist system and we're going to enforce it and become one of the people that are part of it. And so when you think of things like the model minority myth, or these frameworks that make it seem like this one group got it together so everyone else should be able to, it's there very intentionally, because if this 25% of the world population was to be radical, was to reject white supremacy, and was to say we're going to be in active solidarity with Black communities and with all communities really, and push back, that would be just pure numbers alone, you've outnumbered, right, in a lot of groups. And when you think of Asian more broadly, I think that's about 60% of the world population. So there's a reason why all these tools and frameworks have been strategically ingrained into our communities to prevent that level of like people power from happening. And so, yeah, I think there needs to be a question of like, who is actually doing this preparedness work? Are we building solidarity even in those spaces, especially around race?
That's powerful. So I need to find out how to get that that radio transmission, like to get that certification, because we need so many in our community, right? Like, so maybe we need to have that list of like, what do we need to do to prepare. So maybe, I mean, we can kind of shift into like, what are things that we could do right now to build solidarity? And I'll just let whoever wants to dive in first, and then to share like what can we do immediately, and some recommendations for those who'll be joining us later, or those who are joining us right now. What could we be doing right now to build solidarity?
I mean, I'll be somewhat simplistic about it, but it's actually not simple. It sounds simplistic, but it's actually not simple. You have to join some form of a collective, right? Because otherwise solidarity is meaningless. It's just a self-indulgent individual exercise, right? So the notion of solidarity suggests a collectivity that is animated, that is mobilized, and that is moving as a solid, right? Like it's many elements and many people and many beings and lives and energies that kind of consolidate and crystallize together to move on something. So to be in solidarity already presumes that you are part of some form of collective. And if you're not in a if you're already in a collective, then it means assessing that collective and trying to think deeply and seriously about whether the collective you're in, I'm talking about whether you're in a church or you're in a synagogue or you're in a mosque, whether it's that kind of a collective, whether you're in a fraternity or sorority, or in academic organization. Do those collectives show you the capacity to build the kind of solidarity that we are talking about here? If they do, then activate that, like move toward that, organize toward that. If they don't, I'm not telling you to leave that group, right, necessarily, but it does mean you need to seek other kinds of collectives that show the capacity for the kinds of liberationist solidarity that we are talking about, that are not liberal, that don't depend on the state, that don't reproduce, this age-old, civilization-old notion of a model minority myth, which is just another way of talking about neo-colonialism, by the way, right? Which is just as genocidal as old colonialism is, which is just as genocidal as white supremacy. So we have to be in collectives that are capable of being activated and mobilized toward the thing we are calling solidarity.
Yeah, and I'll say on that end, for folks who are interested, there is a whole network of organizations that are specifically engaging South Asian communities in getting involved in this type of work on the East Coast and the West Coast, all over. But if you're in the Bay, I would highly recommend checking out the Alliance of South Asians Taking Action. You can find us on Instagram. Every quarter, we have general meetings for the public, and then we have monthly meetings for those who are members and part of the kind of the core organizing group. And it's a great way to be part of a collective, because you do have to have a political home. You do have to have that accountability, right? And when I know I have these monthly meetings, it forces me to go. Otherwise, you're going to say, I'm too busy, I'm too tired, and a million probably very valid reasons not to do it. But it forces you to get into that cadence of, I'm going to show up, right? I think the second thing is we have to build our skills, because solidarity is not a theory. It is a tangible, it's an action, right? And what does that look like? It looks like learning various skills and utilizing them, sharing them, teaching them. That's really critical. And it also immediately starts to produce something in the community in terms of being able to build those support systems. And then I think there's also that work of reflection. I think particularly, again, for South Asians, there's a lot of stuff that we have to work through. And some of that, it might be on your own or it might be with others, but that has to happen. But I also don't think that's an excuse or a reason for you to not get involved, because I've spoken to a lot of people who have said, well, I think I have so much unlearning to do, or like bias work to do, that like it'll be 10 years before I can get involved in the community, or like before I feel comfortable speaking up about this. And I just feel like that's not the approach, right? It's not, you need to go in some cave and just be insular and reflective and fix all your internalized biases. Like that's never going to happen. Also, that's never going to happen. We're always going to have some type of bias, and we're always going to have to do that unlearning work. So yes, do the reflection, but also at the same time, like get involved. You don't have to wait to be like some perfect version of yourself to say you're going to get involved. And you just have to accept that there will be mistakes. Like you're going to say the wrong thing, you're going to do the wrong thing, but that's also not a reason to like say, oh, because I made a mistake and I got called out for it, or because I hurt someone, that I should never come back into this. Because that's another thing that I've seen, especially with like younger generations who are a little bit more like anxious about these type of things. And it's not about what you say. I mean, it is, but it also isn't, because it's about what you do, right? So you're going to say the wrong thing and you're going to do the wrong thing at one point or the other, and that's a given. And once you accept that, it's really about how do you move forward from that, right? And even with South Asians for Black Lives, I mean, part of why like the group kind of fizzled out was because we made mistakes along the way. We said the wrong things along the way, right? We were not claiming to be experts by any means, but people were putting us on this platform that, once you're on a platform, then it's almost like you can never make a mistake and you have to be this like perfect being. And that's never going to happen. But it was so much anxiety for everyone in the group that it was like, we don't know if we can do this anymore. We don't even know if we should have said anything in the first place. And that just kind of takes away from all the progress and the work that does happen and from the attempts. And that's part of the struggle, right? That's part of the work, is realizing, okay, I made a mistake. How do I move forward? I think sometimes our circles for organizing and activism can be so conflict averse, and conflict really needs to be more in the conversation. We need to also build our skills around that. So I'll stop there, but I think there's a lot that we could be doing today.
Can I just tag along with that and say that I want to compliment what you just said and say what gets me in so many different collective settings is a failure to treat each other with a sense of preciousness and grace. Okay, and I mean that in the sense that I don't mean that in the liberal way where everybody's precious and we need to treat everybody. No, we actually don't. There's some people that really deserve to be despised and need to be driven out of our collective. So I'm not saying that, right? But what I am saying is, when we're in community or even just in collectives with people, I think we generally can develop a sense of the people that are principled, right? They might mess up. They might be malinformed or underinformed about certain things. They might like say really reactionary or do really reactionary stuff. Okay. But if they are nonetheless principled people and are available and humble enough to be corrected in a graceful way while still treated with a sense of presence because they are still your comrade, that's the nuance, the flexibility, and frankly, like the guerrilla warfare characteristic that a lot of our organizations and movements lack. right? And I think social media, the culture, not just social media itself, but the kind of the political culture of social media, where there is a kind of striving toward a curated political perfection, has really been toxic to the way we like come to be in community and treat each other in our movements, because we fail to understand that part of acknowledging each other's preciousness means that we also have to be principled in how we engage each other over errors, right? And over how we correct each other. And it's not about call out culture. It's not about cancellation. It is about accountability, sure, with each other. It is about consequencing the enemy. Yes, absolutely. Right. It is about identifying when there's been an infiltration or somebody is effectively working like an op, whether they're actually an op or not. Right. We have to find ways to deal with all that. But I'm talking about like people who like have a relationship with each other where they've been through some stuff and they know they're principled. There's a grace and preciousness that I think we need to come back to and embrace in a radical, in you know, in a radical way that honors that revolutionary tradition of grace and preciousness.
Thank
I, I,
you.
I was I was actually going to actually say something very similar with that what you just said, Dylan, about ops and being aware of that sort of thing. I was actually going to get to that. I was going to say also that I think one of the ways you can also start sort of building right now and preparing is by really throwing some people into the deep end, right? Like one of the things that I do a few times a year is I lead foraging outings, right? And it serves a couple of purposes, because whenever I'm doing mutual aid of any kind, I'm always observing people. I'm always watching how they move. I'm always watching how they interact with others, how they talk to people, because I'm sort of marking them for later, right? Like, yeah, this person's going to have no problem adjusting to the new reality, right? But I also see people who are they're more egoless, like that's what I'm kind of looking for. People who don't feel like they have to, exist in a hierarchy, people who don't feel like they have to be above other people or be in charge, and people who are aggressively, actively trying to learn. So when I lead these little it's like foraging is like the beginning of my pipeline, right? And so far, nobody has made it past that phase, because the next phase is bushcrafting. But that's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask both of you. Do you do something similar? Number one, do you watch for people who potentially may dismantle your organizations or create strife? And do you have a codified process, or is it just your instincts?
I thought you were going to ask us to go foraging with you.
I
I was
want to
going
hear
to say,
Halima on
yes,
this, because
please take
Halima,
us. So
like,
I want to go get in there.
I'm curious what your organization does.
My organization?
Oh no, I thought I was talking about Halima.
Oh yeah. Okay, sorry.
I would say the organization is really broad, right? And so in the beginning, we had this like membership option where like anyone could just join a listserv and like be a member. And over time, we had to change that structure, because what we realized is that a lot of people will say they want to be involved, but then don't show up. And so we had to do a restructuring. So more recently, we did a restructuring where if you want to become a member, you have to come to a general meeting, which happens once a quarter. And we've moved those to in person. There's also a Zoom option, but it's better to come in person. And then once you do that, you have to meet with 2 members who are already part of the group and have a one-on-one with them, get more information about like, this is what Asatha's doing, here's some of the working groups, and also kind of to vet the individual. And then after they talk to those 2 members, then someone in the membership will bring that name forward and say, I want this person to invite them as a member. And then they have to come to monthly meetings. So that's kind of somewhat of a vetting process, but because we aren't doing like very direct action or anything at that, extra level, there isn't more vetting beyond that. We've had some instances where we've participated in other collectives where they have a more in-depth vetting process, and also principles and unity principles that you have to sign off on and kind of agree to follow through on. But I like what you shared about that observation piece, because I think that really is how you kind of get to know who's ready for this and who isn't. And I think a lot of people want to be ready, but don't always have, I don't know if it's a skill set or it's a mindset thing, but there's a piece there that's kind of missing. And so I'm always curious, like, how do you get past that piece with someone, especially if there is an interest, but there's something missing there, be it a skill or just maybe what motivates you to be in this?
We got to go foraging. We need to have John lead a foraging thing, because then we'll be forged through fire in the foraging, and we'll be able to see. But that also build our character being out there. So
Well, foraging is just a 1 day activity. If you want baptism by fire, then you need to go bushcrafting. So that's like 3 to 4 days in like the deep woods.
I'm with it.
And you only get 1 sleeve of saltines and a canteen of water.
We could do it. We could do it, y'all. We'll learn some important skills, you know.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding about the saltines. Sorry.
So yeah, I mean, we have just a few minutes left, and what I'd like you to, if you can all share some of the projects that you're working on, what are things that ways that people who want to deepen their practice of solidarity, how can they plug in with you and your work?
So I'll just say to y'all, I'm so happy to be in conversation with the three of you, and to have the privilege of being listened to and kind of to be thinking alongside the folks who are here. One of the best things I feel like I can do nowadays is offer myself to people, communities, collectives, to be helpful or useful in whatever way I possibly can. I actually have taken seriously what one of my mentors told me 30 years ago, when he charged me. This is James Turner, one of the he was a mentee of Malcolm X, one of the founders of Africana Studies, the late great James Turner. And what he charged me with, and other students with, was the obligation and responsibility of being an intellectual guerrilla fighter. And I remember when he said that to me in the mid 1990s, I thought he was being a little bit whimsical, and he was kind of like pumping me up. And it took me 5 years, 6 years, 10 years to figure out he was being literal, right? Like, the more I learned about the way the revolutionary and liberationist tradition of guerrilla war works, that yes, the intellectuals, the artists, the poets, the scholars, you know what I mean? Like the caretakers, they play a critical role in the revolutionary guerrilla war, because those skills and those capacities must be shared autonomously from the employer, from the state, and from the colonizer, right? So one way that I feel like I can participate in what people are doing is to understand one of my roles is actually to be a mercenary, right? So like, tap me in, please tap me in. I know this is a very individual thing, but I'm saying I'm doing this, I'm putting myself out there because I'm hoping others will do the same. I want to exemplify what I'm urging people to do, right? So I'm not trying to grandstand, right? I'm saying tap me in, just like we need to tap each other in. So study, whether it's this autonomous study group in which I participate in many at this point, right? One-off conversations, I participate in many. Ongoing conversations and kind of curriculum building, theory and strategy building, I participate in many conversations like that. And usually we think it's going to be one-off, but we end up being in relation to each other for a long time, because these questions, the problems, they don't go away. So when I say mercenary, right, sometimes you're in relation to a mercenary for the rest of your damn life, right? And sometimes you have to be a mercenary for the rest of your damn life, right? So I think it's a humble occupation to do that, right? Even though it sounds kind of cool, right? But it's actually a really humble and humbling occupation. So that is one thing that I think all of us should be doing, not just me.
Halima.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll share that, Asata, definitely get involved. And then Asata Power is a C4 that we started more recently, and has been focused more on immigration. And we did a study that found 1 in 8 South Asians are undocumented, and we're able to work with Pramila Jayapal to do a congressional briefing in DC about this topic, and really get people engaged, and again, a way to also engage our broader community. So Asata and then Asata Power, which is a C4, both great opportunities to get involved. I've shared the website links for both of them. And then a project that I've been working on the side is called Freedom as a Practice. It's a coloring and reflection book that I created specifically for a lot of activists and people in movement space in mind. And it's Again, I think it's so important for us to practice and build our imagination, because the worst thing that we can do is get to a place where our imagination has shrunk of what could be possible or what is possible, and then we concede and make concessions before we've even made the ask or the demand. And I see that happen so much. And even if it never happens, you still want the ability to think about it and imagine it in your head at the very least. And I think it keeps us sharp. So the book that I made is really centered around getting people to take that pause, be it 30 minutes, or, and just think about, what does that future look like that we're fighting for? Because, you can ask most people in your community, like, what are you against? And they're going to give you very clear answers right away. But when it comes time to ask, what do you want? What are you for? That's where you have less and less answers. And that really needs to change, especially as we see empire crumble, right? We're hitting that 250-year mark in this country. And we know that's a timeline for when empires fall. And so if we're thinking the crumble is going to happen, what is going to be put in place of that, right? What are we building instead? And that requires imagination and creativity, because we do not need to recreate and replicate these colonial structures that we're living in that don't work for anyone. So that's a project I've been working on, very excited about, and you can check out my book online.
Thank you. And John, you're going to have to close us out.
I am very much on the page with Dylan, because I'm more mercenary. As soon as you said that, I knew exactly what you were saying. Mainly because that is kind of what works for me for the most part. Like I'm in Ohio right now, in the Midwest, and I've gone as far west as Indiana to deliver water cisterns, to deliver animal feed to farms that are struggling. Like, so literally somebody will call me at 2:00 in the morning and say, can you take this, this fridge full of food, to Buffalo or Erie? And I'll be like, yep, sure. Put on my pants, get in the truck, move. So yeah, I'm very much like that. And also I know what you meant also about it being humble, because you have to really put yourself in the mindset of just service, right? Your goal is to just serve the needs of whoever happens to need something at that moment. Their race doesn't matter. Their politics don't matter. All that matters at that moment is their need. So I also connected with something that you said, Halima, about imagination. And I want to sort of expand upon that a little bit, which is, because you're right, we do have to start preparing for what comes after where we are. And we also have to prepare for the interstitiary area between what's now and what's tomorrow, which is probably not going to be pretty, right? Like, basic services and infrastructure don't usually make that transition very, very seamlessly. But I want to tell people that, because you were saying something about imagination. And what I want to tell people also is, you have to imagine on a more practical level, on a ground level, because one of the things that we are going to be facing as this whole thing heats up, one of the problems with empires is that as they crumble, they take everything around them with them, right? And they thrash and they flail, and a lot of people get hurt in the process. And so you have to start thinking about, what am I going to do about surveillance? Do I have a Faraday bag? Like, those kinds of things in terms of your imagination, they're actually a lot closer to being practical than you might think. Like, people think that technology is some big insurmountable thing. And the truth is that all technology works on really 3 or 4 basic principles. And if you can kick the leg out of one of those, then, then you're ahead of everybody else. And so I think in terms of protecting yourselves from, because right now people are just really busy bypassing the Fourth Amendment, right? So I think if you can put your imagination on ways to protect yourselves and your communities from that kind of thing, then I think that you should definitely put your thinking cap on.
Thank you to our brilliant panelists. This is the beginning of many more conversations, and these are happening every day. This is like how historical moments, right? How movements start is one conversation, these small rooms, and these conversations that we expand. And we invite you to continue in this conversation. We do have some, we'll be sending out links, some more of the links and the contacts to our panelists, but we also invite our followers to contact us and to join us to continue these types of conversations every month we host these types of conversations publicly on live streams. And we also have our solidarity circles on the first Saturday of every month. We are currently in the middle of our long-time campaign. It's going over several months. Many Histories, One Shared Struggle. And this month we're honoring Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And this panel talking about Black and Asian solidarity is really anchoring our work. You know, like we hope that you follow us at MuslimARC.org. You can also find us on the handles with the handle MuslimARC. And if there's any like last words, maybe you could put those in the chat. And let us know if you will put it also in the comments how you could reach our panelists and how you could reach us with follow-up questions. Apologies for not being able to get to all of the questions. This hour went way too fast. But if we could be committed, like as organizers, when is our next meeting? We hope sooner rather than later. So thank you for joining us. Be sure to follow us on our social media channels and follow our esteemed hosts. You can sign up even if you RSVP for some of our events or sign up on our newsletters. We will follow up with resources from this panel and beyond so we can continue to build solidarity and work towards collective liberation. So thank you all for joining us. My name is Marguerite Hill, Programming Director of MuslimARC. Thank you, Halima, John, and Dylan. You have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to conspiring on some anarchist freedom dreams with you all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.